A glob of spit hit the rim of a tin plate. It slid down through the beans. Slow. Wet. Every man in the room saw it. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The boots that did it stayed planted right there beside the table. Heels squared. Spurs still. A thumb hooked into a wide leather belt. A silver star caught the lamplight on a broad chest. The sheriff was waiting. Waiting for the stranger to lunge, to curse, to reach for a gun, to do anything at all. The stranger didn't. His name was Cole Hannigan. He'd ridden into town 2 days back, and he hadn't said more than 10 words to anyone since. He picked up his fork. He looked down at the plate. Then he looked up at the sheriff. And what this quiet drifter did in the next 60 seconds emptied that saloon faster than any gunfire. Stay with me on this one. The town was called Rust Hollow. Sat right where the prairie started to bend up into low brown hills. One main street. 2 stables. A church that hadn't seen a preacher in 11 months. And a saloon called the Iron Maverick. That's where the whole thing happened. Cole Hannigan rode in on a Tuesday afternoon. Buckskin horse. Gray duster. Dust on his boots up to the knee. He tied his mount at the rail outside the Maverick, took his hat off, knocked the road off it against his thigh, and walked inside slow. No hurry. No swagger. Just a man looking for hot food and a quiet table. The barman remembered him later. Said he had eyes that didn't quite look at you. They looked past you. Through you. Like he was reading the room before he ever set his hat on a peg. Now here's the thing about Rust Hollow you have to understand. The sheriff there ran the place. Not in the way most sheriffs run a town. He owned it. His name was Boyd Garrick, and he'd been wearing that star for 9 years. In those 9 years he'd buried 4 men nobody could prove he killed. He had 2 deputies who followed him around like a pair of bird dogs, and he had a habit. The habit was this. When a stranger came through town, Garrick liked to test him. See what he was made of. See how loud he barked. If the stranger barked loud, Garrick took him into the back room and made him quiet. If the stranger didn't bark at all, Garrick kept pushing. He pushed and pushed until he got a reaction. Because Garrick believed every man had a breaking point. And he believed it was the sheriff's job to find it. The afternoon Cole rode in. Garrick was sitting at his usual table by the window. Bottle of rye in front of him. 1 deputy on either side. Both of them tall. Both of them young. Both of them wearing the same lazy half-smile that says we already know how this ends. Garrick looked up when Cole came through the door. Watched him cross the floor. Watched him hang his hat and sit down in a corner booth with his back to the wall. Garrick took a long pull off his bottle and grinned. "Boys," he said, "we got us a quiet one." The deputies laughed. Cole didn't look at them. He ordered a plate of beans and beef and a cup of black coffee. He paid up front. Silver dollar on the bar. He sat down to wait for his food. Hands flat on the table. No weapon in sight. His revolver was hanging in its holster on a wooden peg next to his hat, 6 feet from where he was sitting. That part mattered. Garrick noticed it right away. You don't sit 6 feet from your gun in a strange town unless one of 2 things is true. Either you're a fool, or you've already figured out you won't need it. Garrick decided Cole was a fool. That was his first mistake. The barman brought the plate over. Beans. Hunk of beef. Biscuit on the side. Set it down. Cole nodded a thank you, picked up his fork, and that's when Garrick stood up. Stood up nice and slow. Slid his chair back. Belt creaked. Spurs jingled. Walked across the saloon floor with the kind of walk a man only learns when he's been certain of himself for a long time. Everyone in the room saw him coming. Everyone went quiet. The piano player in the corner stopped playing and pretended to fix something on his bench. Garrick came right up to Cole's table. Stood at the edge of it. Looked down. Cole didn't look up. "You from around here, friend?" "No." "Where you headed?" "West." "West where?" "West of here." A little chuckle from the deputies. Garrick smiled. He liked smart aleck answers. They gave him a reason. "You know who I am?" Cole set his fork down, looked up, looked at the star on Garrick's chest, looked at his face, looked back down at his plate. "Sheriff," he said, quiet, "I just want my supper." That should have been the end of it. In any normal town, in any normal saloon, with any normal man. But Boyd Garrick wasn't a normal man, and Rust Hollow wasn't a normal town. And what he did next was the thing he would still be paying for an hour from now. He cleared his throat, real loud, real deliberate, the kind of throat clearing a man makes when he wants every soul in the room to know what's coming. He leaned forward over the table. His shadow fell across the plate, and then he spit, right in the beans, the thick wet glob. It landed with a sound everybody heard. Nobody breathed. Garrick straightened up, put his hands on his hips, looked around the room the way a man looks around a room when he's just made a point. He was waiting for the explosion. He was waiting for Cole to come up out of that chair, fists swinging, mouth running, going for the gun on the peg 6 feet away. That was the play. That was always the play. A stranger gets mocked. The stranger reacts. The deputies grab him. Garrick beats him bloody in front of God and everybody and tosses him in a cell for disturbing the peace. Same routine 9 years running. Cole didn't come up out of his chair. He looked at the plate. Slow. He looked at the spit sliding down through the beans. Slow. Then he looked up at Garrick. And what was in his face wasn't anger. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even surprise. It was something the sheriff hadn't seen before. Believe me, he'd seen a lot of faces. It was recognition. The kind of recognition a hunter has when he's been tracking something for weeks and finally sees the track he's been looking for. Cole set his fork down on the edge of the plate, very gently, like he was setting down something fragile. He folded his napkin, set it beside the fork. Then he leaned back in his chair, just an inch, just enough so the sheriff was no longer standing over him but standing in front of him. He laced his fingers together on the table, and he spoke, quiet, so quiet half the room had to lean forward to hear him. "Sheriff," he said, "I rode 3 days to find a quiet table and a hot meal. You just spit in the meal. I'd like you to apologize, and I'd like you to bring me another plate." The deputies snorted. Garrick laughed, loud. He turned half around to make sure the whole bar heard him laugh. "Apologize?" he said. "Apologize?" "Yes, sir. Mister, you got a lot of country to cross before you find a man who'll apologize to you for anything in this town. I'm not asking the town. I'm asking you." Garrick stopped laughing, just for a second, just long enough that the deputies noticed. He covered it with a grin and leaned down again, closer this time, both hands flat on the table. "You're gonna eat that plate," he said, "spit and all, and then you're gonna pay for it. And then you're gonna stand up and apologize to me in front of these good people for sitting in my saloon with your boots still dirty and looking at me sideways. Or me and my boys are gonna take you out back and explain it slower. You understand me?" Cole watched him talk. Didn't blink. Didn't move. When Garrick was done, Cole waited a long second. Then he said one sentence. "Sheriff, you don't know who I am." That was all he said. It was the way he said it that did the work. He didn't say it loud. He didn't say it angry. He said it the way you say a fact to a child who's about to do something dangerous. Like he was warning the sheriff. Like he was giving him a chance. Garrick's face moved through 3 things very fast. Confusion, then anger, then something underneath both of those. A flicker of the only thing a man like Garrick was never supposed to feel. Doubt. He covered it the only way he knew how. He stood up tall and reached down and grabbed the edge of the tin plate. Then he flipped it. Beans and beef and spit and biscuit all hit the wood floor between Cole's boots. The plate clattered after it. The deputies whooped. Somebody at the bar laughed nervously and then choked it off. Garrick was breathing hard now, spots of red high on his cheeks. "Get up," he said. "Get up, drifter. You and me are gonna have a real conversation." Cole did not get up. He looked down at the food on the floor between his boots. He looked at the plate, dented, rolling slow to a stop against a chair leg. He looked at the sheriff. And then, slow as a sunrise, he reached into his pocket. Every man in the room felt their gut drop. Hands moved to belts. The piano player ducked. Cole brought his hand out. What was in it was a silver dollar. He set it down on the table where the plate had been. Tap. Right next to where his fork still lay. He pushed it a half-inch toward the sheriff. "That's for the plate," he said. "For the trouble of cleaning it up." Then he stood. Slow. He didn't reach for the gun on the peg. He didn't even look at it. He walked past Garrick, brushing past the man's shoulder so light the sheriff barely felt it. Took his hat off the peg. Settled it on his head. Took his gun belt down. Strapped it on without hurry. Tugged the buckle straight. Walked to the door. Stopped. Without turning around, he said, "Sheriff, I'll be at the livery in the morning. If you'd like to settle anything more between us, come find me there. Just come alone." He pushed the door open and walked out into the afternoon. The door swung shut behind him. For a moment nobody in the Iron Maverick moved. Nobody knew what they'd just seen. Garrick stood there with his hands still on his hips, looking at the door, looking at the silver dollar on the table, looking at the mess of food on the floor. Then he laughed. Loud, sharp, a barking, ugly sound. He turned around and waved at the bar like nothing had happened. "Coward," he said. "Drink up, boys." Saw him off without a finger laid on him. Drinks on the house. The room laughed too, cautious at first, then louder. The piano player started up again. Somebody clapped. Garrick walked back to his table and dropped into his chair and threw back a shot of rye and slapped his deputies on the back. The trouble was over. The drifter had run. That's what everybody in the Iron Maverick believed for the next 45 minutes. They were wrong. 45 minutes of laughter. 45 minutes of bottles passed around. 45 minutes of Garrick telling and retelling the story, getting bigger and louder with every telling. By the third round, Cole hadn't just walked out. He'd run out. By the fifth round, he'd been crying. By the seventh round, Garrick had practically thrown him through the door. But here's the thing about a man who's lying to a room. He's mostly lying to himself. Underneath all that laughing and slapping and pouring, Boyd Garrick was thinking. Thinking about the way that Drifter had looked at him. Thinking about that one sentence. "You don't know who I am." He turned it over in his head like a coin he wasn't sure was real. The deputies had stopped grinning. They'd gone back to drinking the way working men drink when their boss is in a mood. Eyes down, mouth shut. A grizzled old-timer at the bar, fellow named Tom Pell, 60-some years old, prospector type, half-cocked most days, looked up from his whiskey and said something he probably shouldn't have. "Sheriff," he said, "that fellow didn't move like a drifter." Garrick turned his head. Slow. "What did you say, Tom?" "I said he didn't move like a drifter. The way he sat. The way he set that fork down. The way he didn't look at his gun." Tom shook his head. "Sheriff, I seen a man move like that one other time in my life. And it weren't a good man. And it weren't a kind man. And it weren't a man you put your hands on." Nobody said anything for a long second. Garrick stood up. He stood up the way a man stands up when something inside him has just decided. He walked over to Tom Pell. Stood over him. Looked down at him. "Tom," he said, "if I want your opinion, I'll dig you up out of the boot hill where I've been meaning to put you for 10 years. Then he turned and clapped his hands one time. Sharp. "Boys," he said, "we are going to ride out to the livery. We are going to find that drifter. And we are going to put hands on him. The lawful way. Because in the last hour I have decided he is a horse thief, an arsonist, and a man wanted in 3 counties. And I'd hate for him to escape." The deputies stood up. Garrick walked over to a peg on the wall, took down 2 more tin stars, and tossed them at the 2 biggest men sitting at the bar. A man called Heck Doolin. A man called Floyd Mayer. both of them well over 6 feet. Both of them well known in Rust Hollow for the kind of work nobody else wanted to do. "Pin those on," Garrick said. "Drinks have been free all evening. Time to earn them." Heck and Floyd pinned the stars on. They were now officially deputies of the Rust Hollow Sheriff's Office. They were now officially the law. And the law was about to ride to the livery 4 men strong, with 3 rifles and 4 pistols between them, to deal with one quiet drifter who dared to ask for an apology. You see what just happened? The fight was no longer between Cole and the sheriff. The fight was now between Cole and the badge. For pieces of tin. For guns. A whole town's worth of permission to do whatever they wanted. And a whole town's worth of silence after. That's the moment this story turned. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. There's more like this one waiting for you. Now back to the livery. The 4 of them mounted up outside the Iron Maverick. The sun was low. The street was empty. The shops had all closed up early. Some of them on purpose. Word had spread the way word always spreads in a small town. Something was about to happen. Cole was at the livery. He'd been there for about an hour. He'd brushed his buckskin down himself even though the boy who worked there had offered to do it. He'd checked the saddle. He'd cleaned his rifle. He'd cleaned both his pistols. He'd laid out a small leather pouch on a barrel beside him. The livery boy, couldn't have been more than 14 years old, was watching all of this from the corner of the barn. Eyes huge, hands shaking. "Mister," he finally said, "are they comin' for you?" "Yes." "How many?" "4. Maybe more. Depends on how brave the sheriff is feeling." "You should run, mister. Sheriff Garrick'll kill you. He's killed before. For times that we know of." Cole looked up from the pistol he was loading, looked at the boy, and for the first time since he'd ridden into Rust Hollow, he smiled. Not a big smile, just a corner of his mouth. "Son," he said. "I know." He finished loading, slid the pistol into the holster on his right hip, looked at the boy again. "What's your name, son?" "Eli, sir." "Eli, I need you to do something for me. I need you to go out the back of this barn and run real quiet down to the church and stay there until morning. Whatever you hear, you stay in that church. Whatever you hear. You understand me?" "Yes, sir." "Good boy. Go on now." Eli went. Cole listened to his boots scrape across the hay and then across the dirt out back. Then it was quiet. Cole sat down on a wooden barrel. He took his hat off and set it on his knee. He waited. He could hear them coming now. For horses. Spurs jingling. A loud laugh. Garrick's laugh. Closer. Closer. Cole closed his eyes for just a second. Then he opened them. And he stood up. The 4 horses pulled up outside the livery. The 4 men dismounted. Cole could hear Garrick giving orders. Heck around the back. Floyd on the south side. Deputies front. Garrick himself coming in through the big main doors. That was Garrick's mistake. Number 2 of the evening. He'd just split his force 4 ways. The big main doors creaked open. Lantern light cut in across the floor. And there was Garrick standing in the doorway with one of his deputies behind him, hand on his pistol. "Drifter," Garrick called out, loud. "Come out where I can see you." Cole stepped forward into the lantern light. He was standing in the middle of the barn, hat back on his head, gun belt strapped tight, both hands loose at his sides. He didn't look afraid. He didn't look angry. He looked exactly like he'd looked in the Iron Maverick. Calm, settled, ready. "Sheriff," he said, "I told you to come alone. And I told you you were under arrest. For horse thieving. For arson. For murder in 3 counties. Now you can come quiet or you can come bloody. Up to you." Cole nodded slow, as if he'd expected exactly that. "Sheriff, before this goes any further, I'm going to give you one last chance to walk away. Take your boys. Get on your horses. Ride back to town. Tomorrow I'll be gone. None of this happened. Nobody has to die." Garrick laughed. It was the wrong laugh. The deputy behind him laughed too, but it was the kind of laugh a man does because his boss is laughing. He didn't really mean it. "Nobody has to die," Garrick said. "Listen to him, boys. Listen to the drifter give us our orders." He took 2 steps forward, hand resting on his pistol now. The deputy behind him fanned out to the side. Cole could hear Heck come in through the back door behind him. Floyd was probably at the south wall by now. For men, for guns, one drifter standing in the middle of a barn with the lantern light on his face. Garrick was certain how this ended. "Last chance, drifter," he said. "Hands up." Cole did not put his hands up. "Sheriff," he said, "let me tell you who I am." Then he said his name. His real name, not Cole Hannigan. The one his mother had given him. The one that had been printed in newspapers from Kansas City to El Paso 8 years ago. The one that had been on a federal badge for 12 years before that. Garrick's face changed. You could see it change in the lantern light, like watching weather come across a prairie. First the confusion, then the realization, then the cold-dropping pit of understanding what he'd just done. What he'd done in the saloon. The spit, the plate, the words in front of a whole room. He had just spit in the food of a man who had hunted men for a living. A man who had brought in 17 killers alive and 4 dead. A man who, 3 years ago, had taken off the badge because he'd decided the law didn't always reach where the law was needed, and had been quietly, privately, riding the territory ever since. He'd been looking for one man, this drifter who wasn't a drifter. He'd ridden into Rust Hollow following a lead about that man. That man, it turned out, was Sheriff Boyd Garrick. I'm not going to give you Cole's real name, not because it matters to the story, but because where this story ends, his name needs to belong to the silence he chose. Some men earn the right to vanish. Garrick's hand was still on his pistol, but his hand had gone still. His fingers weren't moving the way fingers move when they're about to draw. They'd locked up. The deputy behind him hadn't realized yet. The deputy still thought this was a routine arrest. "Sheriff," Cole said. "Quiet. Take your hand off that gun." Garrick didn't. Garrick drew. He was fast. He'd practiced in front of a mirror in his office for 9 years. He was the fastest gun in Rust Hollow. He was probably the fastest gun in the county. Cole was faster. I'm not going to tell you it was close. It wasn't. Cole drew. Fired once. Holstered. Garrick's pistol was halfway out of leather. Cole's bullet caught him high in the right shoulder. Not the heart. Not the head. The shoulder. The pistol dropped out of his hand into the dirt. The deputy behind Garrick started to bring his gun up. Cole had already turned. The second shot hit the deputy's wrist. He screamed and dropped his pistol. Cole was already moving toward the back of the barn. Heck had come up behind a stack of hay bales with a rifle. Cole's third shot hit the stock of the rifle and shattered it in Heck's hands. Heck dropped to his knees holding splinters and bleeding palms. He hadn't even fired. Floyd, outside on the south wall, heard 3 shots inside the barn in under 2 seconds. He decided right there that whatever was happening was not what he had been paid drinks for. He turned around and ran back the way he'd come, out into the dark, and Rust Hollow didn't see Floyd Mayer for the next 9 years. Inside the barn, it was quiet again. Garrick was on his knees in the dirt. Right hand clutched against his left shoulder, blood running between his fingers. His badge had pulled loose. It hung crooked off his chest. The deputy was sitting against the wall, holding his wrist, weeping. Heck was on his knees, hands open, palms up, surrendering to nothing in particular. Floyd was gone. Cole walked over to Garrick. He stood over him the way Garrick had stood over him in the saloon. He looked down. Garrick looked up. And what was in Garrick's face now was not pride. It was not power. It was not the easy ownership of 9 years of a town. It was a man who just realized he'd been dead for an hour and hadn't known it. Cole reached down. He took the silver star off Garrick's chest, held it in his palm, looked at it. Then he put it in his pocket. "Sheriff," he said, I'm taking you back to Federal District. There are warrants on you. 3 of them. I've been carrying them for 2 months. I came to Rust Hollow last week to confirm it was you. I wasn't sure until I saw your face in that saloon. Garrick's mouth opened and shut. Nothing came out. Cole looked around the barn. Looked at the deputy. Looked at Heck. Boys, he said. You can walk out of here. Tonight. Both of you. You don't come back to Rust Hollow. You don't pick up another badge as long as you live. If I ever hear either of your names attached to a tin star again, I'll come find you and we won't talk first. You understand. They understood. By morning, the town of Rust Hollow was a different town. Word had moved fast. Word always does. By the time the sun came up over the brown hills, every door on Main Street was open, and people were standing on their porches the way people stand on their porches when they're not afraid for the first time in 9 years. Tom Pell, the old prospector from the bar, was the first one down to the livery. He stood in the open doorway with his hat in his hands. Cole was tightening the cinch on his buckskin. Garrick was tied to the saddle horn of a second horse, hands bound behind his back, shoulder bandaged with a strip of clean cotton from the livery boy's mother. Tom cleared his throat. Cole looked up. "Mister," Tom said, "you taking him out today?" "Yes." "How far?" "Federal District is 90 miles east. 3 days if the weather holds." Tom nodded. He didn't ask the question he wanted to ask, but Cole heard it anyway. "He'll be tried, Tom, properly, by a federal judge. There's enough evidence to hang him 3 times over. But I'm not going to be the one to do it. The law is going to do it. That's the whole point of going to get him." Tom nodded again. He scuffed his boot in the dirt. Then he said the thing he'd come to say. "Mister, about those 4 men he killed. Did you know about them when you rode in?" "I knew about 3. The 4th one was new to me. That 4th one was my boy." Cole stopped working on the cinch. He turned and faced Tom, took his hat off slow, held it against his chest. "Tom, I'm sorry. I didn't know. No reason you would have. He wasn't from here. He was just passing through. Got into something with Garrick over a card table and Garrick took him out back. They told me he tried to draw on the sheriff. I never believed it. My boy didn't carry a gun. He was 22 years old. He was on his way to California to be a schoolteacher." Cole stood there with his hat in his hand for a long time. "Tom," he said, "will you ride with me as far as the federal court? I'd like you to be the one who tells the judge about your boy." Tom blinked, wiped his eye with the heel of his hand, nodded. "I'll get my horse. Now here's the thing I want to tell you about what happened in Rust Hollow after Cole rode out. Because some stories end with the showdown. But the real ending is what comes after. The 2 deputies who'd ridden with Garrick that night left town before noon. They didn't take anything with them but the clothes they were wearing and a few dollars. Heck went south. Floyd was never seen again. The deputy with the wrist became a barkeep in another state who never wore another tin star as long as he lived. Just like Cole had told them. Eli, the livery boy, was made the deputy sheriff of Rust Hollow when the town voted on it the following Sunday. He was 14 years old. They voted him in because, as the old butcher put it, any man who'd hide in a church on a 14-year-old say-so deserves more honor than the 4 men who rode out to that livery with badges on. Eli wore the badge for 41 years and never drew his pistol on a soul. He died in a bed in a house his daughter bought him with money she made as a teacher in California, of all places. The Iron Maverick took down the long mirror behind the bar and put up a piece of paper in its place. On the paper, somebody had written 4 names. The 4 men Garrick had killed. Tom Pell's boy's name was the last one. The paper stayed up for 20 years. By the end it was so yellow you couldn't read it. But people still took their hats off when they came in. Just out of habit. And Cole rode east with Tom Pell and Boyd Garrick. 90 miles to the federal court. Garrick was tried. Garrick was convicted. Garrick was hanged on the 11th day of the following month. Tom Pell was in the front row of the courtroom on every day of the trial. After the hanging, Tom went home to Rust Hollow and lived another 12 years and died in his sleep. Cole didn't go back to Rust Hollow. He never wore a badge again. Not even quietly. Not even on the inside of his coat. He kept riding. There were other Garricks out there. There always are. Years later, a woman in a town 2,000 miles west of Rust Hollow opened her door one morning and found an envelope leaning against the boards. Inside the envelope was a silver star with a bullet nick on its edge. A folded letter she didn't recognize the handwriting of, and the silver dollar she'd given her husband the morning he left to go west, looking for honest work as a schoolteacher. The letter said this: "This star belonged to the man who took your husband from you. It belongs to you now. You can do with it what you want. The man wearing it is dead. The man who killed him is at peace. So I hope in time are you." The letter wasn't signed. She held the silver dollar against her chest. She walked out into her front yard, and she watched the road, east toward the rising sun, for a long time. There was nobody coming. There was nobody she could see. But somewhere out there, on a buckskin horse with dust on his boots, a quiet man was riding west. And he was still looking. And he was still listening. And every now and then, when a sheriff he'd never met in a town he'd never seen leaned down over a stranger's plate and started to clear his throat, that quiet man on that buckskin horse felt it, a long way off, like a tug on a string, and he'd turn his horse, and he'd ride toward it, because the law doesn't always reach where the law is needed, and some men have decided that they will.